Good afternoon. Thanks so much for joining us for the first ever Census Geo Forum. We hope to have a lot of great presentations today, talking about all the great work we do here in the Geography Division of the U.S. Census Bureau. And to give us a brief introduction, here is Deborah Stempowski, Associate Director for Decennial Census Programs.
Thank you, John, and good afternoon, everybody. I'm thrilled that you all decided to be here today for our first ever Geo Forum. This two-day event is going to give you a lot of exposure to information across our geographic data, our products, and our programs that the Census Bureau supports. I know we had hundreds and hundreds of folks who signed up. That is super exciting because geography is such an important topic. It's the beginning of everything we do. It's the start of every census, and it also supports so many other programs at the Bureau. I know those of you who have signed up have a variety of interests. Maybe it's on our mapping applications and viewers that help you learn more about your community. Some of you are probably old pros at using our Tiger line files and have done so for decades, and you want to learn more about our next delivery or what are the new formats that we'll have out there. You might want to learn where we're headed in the future with AI or how to use IPMs to investigate geographic data from our past. And I hope a few of you are here to learn about our many partnership programs that enable the Census Bureau to maintain the most accurate address, feature, and boundary data possible. Regardless of why you're here, I'm very excited that you're taking the time out of your busy days to learn about something that goes on at the Census Bureau that I'm very proud of. And I hope you'll share that too as you listen through our different presentations at our first ever Geo Forum. So to get things started and underway, I'd like to hand it over to Andrea Johnson, who is currently overseeing our Geography Division at the Census Bureau. Andrea, take it away.
Hi, thanks, Deb. I'm beyond thrilled to be here this afternoon for our first ever Census Bureau Geography User Conference, or what we're calling the Geo Forum. As Deb mentioned, my name is Andrea Johnson, and I'm acting chief of the Census Bureau's Geography Division. So while I've worked here for 29 years, I've really been sort of an uber fan, like a crazy fan of census data throughout my younger life, particularly Census Tiger line files. Starting in about 1990, when right after the census, I used the very first version of Tiger line in my graduate studies. And since then, I really have not fallen out of love with what we do here. So it really is probably one of the best professional honors of my life to introduce our first ever Geo Forum. For those of you who might be new to the Census Bureau's geographic data, and I hope there's a few of you out there, our flagship product, Tiger, or Topologically Integrated Geographic Encoding and Referencing Data, there will be a quiz on that later. It's a digital map of physical features like roads and rivers and sometimes railroads. It also includes statistical and administrative boundaries such as census blocks, census tracts, counties, place boundaries for all 50 states, our territories, and U.S. territories. The original Tiger was developed in the 80s, so we're going back in time in collaboration with the USGS, or United States Geological Survey. And that was to support the 1990 census. But here we're coming on the 2030 census, so that's 40 years, right? Tiger enabled the Census Bureau to modernize our mapping and data collection processes, which up until then had relied on slow paper data methods for geographic data collection and release. And then, like I mentioned, Tiger Line was released to our data users like you as part of the 1990 census. We also added the math, but we'll talk about that on another occasion. Tiger's creation marked a shift from paper-based proprietary maps to open, standardized, topologically sound digital geographic data. And Tiger Line set a precedent, which we're really building on here today with the Geo Forum, for how national data sets, national maps could be shared, integrated, and across sectors how we can influence modern GIS workloads, mapping standards, and open data practices. So that's why I'm so excited to be here today to sort of, this is the modern version of that. Since that time that Tiger was created, Census Bureau has continued to create thousands of Tiger line files. Many of the folks who are going to present to you today have been actively involved in that process. We have evolved from our ASCII format to shapefiles and now to geodatabases. And for the last several years, we've made many of the geographic to not like new users through Tiger Web products or through many of our viewers. We also have been working to support the release and use of all kinds of data that we collect here at the Census Bureau by creating more interactive applications. You're going to hear about many of the new Tiger products and maps from Kevin Hawley and Suzanne McCardle this afternoon. But as I mentioned, the census also maintains quite a few boundaries. In fact, we are the keeper of 14 million unique geographies or boundaries, including boundaries for over 40,000 units of government. So today, you can learn more about these geographic areas at John Policino's session this afternoon, or you can learn about how partners help us maintain accurate boundaries and addresses through our partner session later this afternoon. For those attending tomorrow, I'm excited that you're going to really get into the details, get into some more advanced techniques on how to use our data and where we're headed with AI, and how others outside of the Census Bureau, how our data plays a critical part in their success. Finally, if you're excited like I am and you can't make it for whatever reason, we will be posting all of these sessions on Census Academy. So thanks for joining. I hope today's GeoForum is the first of many to come. And before I turn it over, I really wanted to give a hearty thanks to everyone who pitched in to make this idea a reality. This started out as one person's thought, like, hey, could we do this? And we said, why have we never done this before? So after that, it sort of snowballed and a lot of people got involved. We've got a lot of folks that are presenting their work here. And really, this is the collaboration of many people. So thank you very much. And without further ado, over to John.
Thanks so much, Deb and Andrew, for those great introductions. We're really excited to get started. But before we do that, we have a couple of important housekeeping rules. As mentioned earlier, this event is being recorded. For your convenience, it will be uploaded to our Census Academy site with all the supplemental materials related within about 30 business days. We welcome written questions during the webinar. Please submit your written questions using the Q&A panel, which is at the bottom center or the bottom right side of your WebEx screen. Please take a moment to locate that now. It'll be a couple, like 3 little dots to the right. Once you found the Q&A panel, make sure you choose all panelists from the drop-down menu, and this will ensure we see your question. Also, we ask, please do not include any personal or business identifiable information with your questions. We'll keep the chat panel open so to allow us to provide key links and other resources throughout the day. Keep in mind you won't be able to respond to the chat, but you will be able to respond using the Q&A function. My colleagues and I will be monitoring the Q&A panel. As time allows, we will answer your questions directly to you through the Q&A panel, or if there's time, we'll share your question with the presenters. All questions and responses will be posted as part of the webinar materials on the census.gov/academy site within 30 business days. So if we don't get to your questions today, just go ahead and wait for those materials to post, or please feel free to email us at geo.geography@census.gov, and we will reply to your questions in a much more timely manner. As you can see, we're in a virtual environment, and sometimes technical difficulties might occur. If you're having issues, try a different browser, such as Chrome, or consider logging out and logging back into the session. If you're having audio issues, try selecting the computer audio or calling into the webinar via phone. Here's our agenda for the first day. We have a bunch of great sessions throughout the day with a break around 2:30 to allow people a little bit of time off their computer. And as you can see, our first session will be starting presently, and I'll have the great pleasure of introducing, myself. And I'll be going over our census geographic areas. All right. Putting people in place. The Census Bureau's mission is to serve as the nation's leading provider of quality data about its people, places, and economy. Geography is what provides meaning and context to our statistical data. By tabulating census data at different levels of geography, a wide range of stakeholders can utilize our data to make decisions and take action. The Census Bureau manages over 45 different types of geographic areas. Together, these areas cover all 50 states, the District of Columbia, Puerto Rico, and all U.S. territories. Our geographic area is broadly divided into statistical and legal and administrative geography. Statistical geography is created by the Census Bureau and along with stakeholders for data tabulation and presentation. It provides coverage in areas where legal and administrative entities may be incomplete or non-existent, and usually does not acquire official legislation. It is usually not represented by an official government, and these can evolve over time from practice, custom, usage, or need. Legal and administrative boundaries are areas that originate from legal action, such as a law from a legislature. These names and boundaries are defined in official documentation, such as an ordinance, and they are usually represented by either an appointed or elected officials. These can evolve over time, but again, through legislation or legal action, and they are created for the purpose of administration or the activity and services of a government or program. This is an example of our non-tribal geographic hierarchy with all the different levels of geography we maintain here at the Census Bureau, with all of them integrating together to create all of the levels that are needed for the different purposes. Here, all of the legal geographies are in blue, and the statistical are in red. So for example, below states, we have our incorporated places, counties, census tracts, block groups, and blocks, and many of them fit together neatly, but sometimes they don't, and I'll go over how that happens. So census tracts are one of the most important pieces of our statistical geography. These are small, and we like to keep them relatively permanent statistical subdivisions of a county or an equivalent, and they are updated in concert with local participants. They started basically as an idea of how do we identify a neighborhood in New York City, and we grew them throughout the entire country. We like to keep them stable so that they are able to be, analysis can be done on them over time as well as across the nation. We have an optimum population of about 4,000 people. So while a census tract, let's say around Los Angeles or Dallas might be quite small, it will have about the same population as a census tract in Wyoming or in North Dakota. And so any analysis will be able to be done between those using more of an apples to apples comparison as opposed to a local government, which may be of vastly different sizes. These are updated in concert with our partners before every census during the Participant Statistical Areas Program, or PSAP. Here's an example of a tract in Los Angeles. The star represents where we're going to zoom in. And this tract is just outside Dodger Stadium. This is about the size of a tract in an urban area, contains about 4,000 people. But without the tract geography, we might not be able to get precise information on the people who live here without doing a little bit more complex analysis, because these are ready-made across the nation, you'll be able to compare this tract with many other in Los Angeles and around the country. Now, within census tracts, there are also block groups and blocks, and block groups are smaller than census tracts, and within a block groups are a block. Blocks are typically about what you would think of as a city block, and so those are used for our collection purposes, as well as some of our housing unit data is available at that level. But because a block could be of greatly different size around the nation, tracts are where we get the really most comparable data. And this is an example of the 3 different geographies in Montgomery County, Maryland. On the far left will be a census tract. You see they are much bigger. And then on the far right are the blocks, which are much smaller in size and way more dense in a varied size. Urban areas are a very popular statistical geography the U.S. Census Bureau creates. They are created to delineate where large numbers of people live in a dense area. They are also include some adjacent areas that are maybe less dense in order to get a sense of what the urban area or city might be. These are within the nation, but they can cross state lines as needed. And new to the last 2020 census, we changed the definition a little bit. We increased the threshold to about 5,000 people, and we now include housing, around 2,000 housing units, to indicate a more densely populated area. And these are created after each census by the Census Bureau. And the way that we determine rural in the Census Bureau is basically any area that is not urban is considered rural. So here's an example of an urban area. It's the areas in blue are urban in this area of Texas and Oklahoma. We'll zoom into Oklahoma City, and we could see the extent of the urban area, but we could also see little sections of it which are not directly connected to the main area. And these are areas that are urbanized and have some rural area in between, but we count them as part of the urban area in order to put together all of the relevant areas of services, goods, and where people live to each urban area. Counties or equivalents are primary divisions of states and territories. In Alaska, they're called boroughs, Louisiana, parishes. So they're not all called counties, but they're considered equivalent. So these are legal geographies created by the states, updated pretty rarely. And they are updated using the Boundary and Annexation Survey, which is a very important annual survey, which we send out to all local governments around the nation so that they could update their legal geographies as necessary. Within those counties, in certain states, we have minor civil divisions or MCDs. These are our county sub-layer or county subdivision layers for those who use our Tiger Line or other data. These are a legal part of geography which is in between a county and what we would consider a city or a town. They're more common in the Northeast and northern states. They could be called a town, they could be called a township. And in some states, they are a legal geography with elected officials and provide services, and others, they're simply administrative, which are just there for statistical purposes for the state in order to group different areas together. And in certain areas, they're way more important than others. For instance, in the Northeast and New England in particular, these MCDs are called towns, and they are the primary government for most people outside of the cities. So that's how they identify, that's how they get most of their services. And these are also updated by the Boundary and Annexation Survey as needed. Here's an example of some of the complexities of this geography right outside of New York City. Is the town of Hempstead in Nassau County. And we'll zoom in, and the area enclosed in the red line is the town of Hempstead. Within it, there are many other incorporated places and county subdivisions. The incorporated places are bold, the census designated places are italicized. And so the town of Hempstead provides many services to the people who live here, but so do the incorporated places. And so because of all these different complex geographies, we have this layer to show what is going on with the local government here And because we have this level of geography ready, built, and created, if you go to data.census.gov, you'll be able to just enter the name of Hempstead, and you'll be able to bring up all the relevant population and income information without having to do any sort of complex queries or looking up specific areas. It's ready-made and available to use to compare to its neighbors or similar areas around the country. Now, not all states have MCDs, and so to create a consistent geography around the nation, we have census county divisions, or CCDs. And these are in states which do not have that legal level of geography between a city or a village or an equivalent name and their county. And so these are created so that a similar level of data is available for between those two levels without the legal structure existing in those states. And these, because they are just statistical, are updated using the PSAP, or Participant Statistical Areas Program. Here's an example. In Kentucky, we have Raccoon, Kentucky, within Pike County. And this area of Pike County is quite sparsely populated, but within the county, there's only a handful of villages and cities. And so the people who live within the area highlighted, it would be very difficult to get information on them if we didn't have this level of geography available. But because we do, we're able to see how many people live there and vital information about them, which would be more difficult to get at lower than county level if these CCDs didn't exist. Incorporated places are common throughout the nation. This is what you might think of as a city or a town or a village, things of that nature, different names. These are legal. These are a primary unit of government where a lot of people get many of their services. They are legally defined and they're updated using the Boundary and Annexation Survey. So we'll go to an example here in Maryland of Mount Rainier City, right outside of Washington, D.C. It's a small little incorporated place in the highlighted area there, right outside the boundaries of D.C. And the people who live there know that they live in Mount Rainier City. They have an elected government, and we're able to get information on them in this fashion because it is a defined area with a local government and the people who live there, and that government's able to get that information because of the boundaries we have. Now, not everywhere is covered by an incorporated place. So similarly to CCDs, we have census designated places. These are areas where there has been a need seen for this small level information without the equivalent of an incorporated government existing. And so these are created in conjunction with local governments to fill a need through both the Boundary and Annexation Survey and the PSAP program in order to create a more densely defined area with recognizable boundaries, meaningful to the people who live there. So here in Maryland, there are a good number of them because Maryland has very strong county governments, but a large number of people live, especially in the areas outside of Baltimore and Washington, and so a need has been found to create these CDPs. Also, there are very unique situations which might show the need for the creation of CDPs. Here in Island County, Washington, there's the island of Camano, and this island is a CDP for a variety of reasons. There's a good number of people who live there. It's recognized, people know what it is, but even though it is an island county, really the only way to get to it is from Snohomish County through a short bridge. All of their services are provided by that county, so the Snohomish County needs to know who lives in that area because they're not covered by their county government. But they need to know for the school district purposes, for water purposes, for all different purposes, we need to know who lives on this island, even though they don't have their own local government other than Island County. And so because we have a CDP, we're able to see how many people live there, all their income and education and housing information because it's ready-made and available for people to use. Other CDPs includes places like the Villages in Florida, which is a very sprawling area. And because CDPs are not a confined legal geography, they're able to be updated much more quickly using the PSAP program. So places like in Florida or or other fast-growing areas are able to be added to much more quickly, and we could again see the population of what's going on in this area. So in Maryland, here's an example of the two different types of geographies we have on the place layer. Again, the blue is incorporated places, and the red is our statistical geography, CDPs. We'll overlay them together, and almost the whole area between DC and Baltimore are covered by these different geographies. It shows how dense it is. It shows that there is a very strong county governments providing these services. And some areas also have incorporated places as well. And you can see a similar pattern here in this map. It's from 2010. Our 2021's just about to be released, but it's very similar. So the green shows our census designated places, and the purple are incorporated places. And you can see there are patterns to this: Northeast and some areas of the South and West, many more CDPs, with the center of the country, many more incorporated places. But as we covered the vastness of the nation, every state has different rules. So some places like New York have very defined rules: county, MCD or town, and village are beneath that. But a state like Ohio doesn't have those rules. So here's an example of Lancaster, Ohio, which is its own city and its own MCD, the township, but parts of the city of Lancaster bleed over into other townships. So it's possible to have different people who all live within Lancaster City also live within 3, 4 different townships. So keeping track of all these different rules, all these different geographies is a huge part of the work we do, and working with local governments to make sure everything is accurate. So when people get the data they need, it is accurate for them and meets them where they need it. There are a variety of different programs for how we update Census Bureau geography. I mentioned some of them before. BASS, Boundary and Annexation Survey, is annual. It's every year. We invite tribal, state, and local governments to participate to review boundaries and update annexations or de-annexations, create or dissolve areas. These are all done legally. So these are done in concert with the legal local governments, state governments, county governments. The PSAT program, Participant Statistical Areas program, is done every 10 years just before a census, and we involve stakeholders in this. This is how we update a lot of our statistical geography tracts, CDPs, etc. And they don't require legislative records, just an agreement between the different stakeholders. If this makes sense, we'll go forward with this. We also participate in redistricting for all legislatures throughout the country, and most importantly, the congressional districts, so the redistricting data program. And these are, we invite our different state partners to include in these different programs, our Black Boundary Suggesting Project, voting district projects. And these are done in order to make sure that we have the legislative geographies that are relevant and necessary for the whole country. Together with our addressing and road update programs, we want to make sure that everybody in the country is located in the place they're supposed to be, where they actually live. So when they get the data, when they give us data, either through the decennial census or the ACS or other surveys, it is relevant to where they actually live. So we want to put people on the right place on the map. We want to do that for every single block group, for every single tract, for every single county, for every single state throughout the whole nation. So myself and all geography division has a really huge, enormous job to do, and we rely on our partners to help do that. So that whenever people use the data we create, that is relevant and accurate to them. Thank you so much, and we'll take any questions right now. And here's are the sources of the different data I used. And please feel free to contact us, geo.geography@census, if you have any further questions.
Thank you, John. We are still working through a lot of the questions we're receiving in the Q&A. At this time, I don't have any to send right back to you, but we will keep answering what folks are submitting to us. And thank you again, John, for the great presentation.
Thank you so much. Now I'll turn it over to Dr. Julia Cho. Dr. Julia Cho is Senior Social Science Analyst at the USDA's Rural Development Innovation Center. Thank you so much for joining us.
Hello, everybody. My name is Julia Cho. I'm from the USDA Rural Development, and I'll be talking about how we use census data and how we use it for our mapping tools. Let me share. So today I would like to discuss who we are, USDA Rural Development, and my Innovation Center and Data Analytics Division. And then we'll discuss how we use census data for program implementation and are the statutory requirement. And we'll end the session with how we use geospatially the census data. And last but not least, why we need role-specific data and how important census data is. Okay, let's get started. So U.S. Department of Agriculture Rural Development, we seek to help rural communities develop and improve the quality of life. And we are actually the leading provider of loans, grants, and technical assistance in rural America, carrying out more than 40 programs. We have 3 main program areas: rural housing service, which houses single-family housing program, multi-family housing program, and community facilities program. Rural utility service program area houses telecommunication programs, electric and water and environmental programs. And last but not least, rural business service program houses business and cooperative programs. Within USDA Rural Development, we have the Innovation Center under the leadership of the Chief Innovation Officer, and we provide a range of innovative data-driven products and services to help our government officers to make a data-driven decision. And inside the Innovation Center, Data Analytics Division, we call ourselves DAD, is a part of the main data-driven, we're the part of the services that provide products and services. Let's see. So Data Analytics Division, we try to harness the power of data analytics to enhance evidence-based decision-making. And our acting division director is Dr. Casey Martin. And we have 2 branches, program performance and program evaluation. And we both we work together to work on strategic investment and field support. We support program delivery through data analysis, program performance, and evaluation of our programs. We also provide data visualization, and we are also a part of data governance and strategy of the USDA. So how do we use census data to support our mission area? We use census data for program implementation. Especially most important thing is eligibility of our programs. And we use geospatial mapping tools to guide the applicants and also the program officers to determine eligibility. And we'll discuss it in more details in the later slides. We also use census data to allocate the funding. So single-family housing program, community facility program, and water and environmental programs actually get allocated funds through their state offices, and we use census data to determine how much funding each state will get for each program. We also use census data to measure civil rights compliance We also use census data to calculate the state non-metro median household income, which is a big part of how much grants that each applicant in each state can get. Also, we use census data for program statutory requirements. We certainly use social and demographic factors like income and poverty data to determine which areas we're going to focus on. We actually have a persistent poverty set-asides, and of course, we use census data to identify which counties are persistently poverty struck. And most recently, the administration announced that they're going to select the Opportunity Zone 2.0 census tracts for each state. So we use census data to map the possible rural census tracts that could be eligible for Opportunity Zone, and we'll discuss it a little bit more later. Of course, we use census data for technical assistance and strategic investment, and we use a lot of mapping tools for that. Lastly, we use census data when we do performance measurement and evaluation and impact evaluation studies. So for program implementation, in more details, we use specifically decennial census data for the size of population, which is one of RD program's eligibility factors. In general, we invest in rural areas outside the boundaries of a city, town, or places of more than 50,000 population. That is for our RBCS, our Rural Business Cooperative Program. For community facility program, we have threshold of 20,000 population. For water and environmental program, that's the lowest threshold of 10,000 population. Program eligibility is statutorily defined by population using the decennial census data and other criteria. So we update our data every 10 years when the decennial census data come out. Data analytics division, where I'm at, supports the program implementation by archiving the demographic and socioeconomic data in one place. And we have developed the internal SharePoint sites where we house all the data sets that the program officers and the field officers need. And that's the look of it. For statutory requirements, we develop a lot of geospatial tools to help the field officers. We have internal and external ArcGIS mapping tools where the customers can easily access the eligibility map. And we use Census 2020 population data now at the place level geography to determine eligibility. And then we also have urban and rural designation layers at the census blocks. So this is the Rural Development Eligibility Lookup Tool. This is an external website where everybody can access. So the applicant can also go and check whether their location or the business area can be eligible for our programs. So I'm going to do a live demo. So any search engine, you can type USDA rural development eligibility. And USDA eligibility will pop up first. And of course, we have a disclaimer that the eligibility mapping tools does not determine eligibility. They should contact the local office or the USDA program representative. We have different eligibility mapping tools for each program, but I'm going to click on Water and Environmental Direct. That one. Okay, so I made this map really big at 150%, so everybody can see a little bit. And then you can actually type a city, county, state, or even your address, and then it will zoom into that place. So I'm going to put Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. And then it will zoom in and out of Harrisburg. And the orange area means the city is not eligible. But it looks like RBCS, the Rural Business Program, is eligible. And 1RD, that's the Guaranteed Loan Program for our Rural Business Program, Water, Environmental, and Community Facility Guaranteed Loans Program in one application. So it looks like they are eligible. The city is eligible. You can also turn on and off the layer. So I'm going to turn off community facility, water and environmental program, electric, and you can see the city of Harrisburg. Now it doesn't have the orange area, which means it's eligible for RBCS and 1RD. You can also put in a specific address. I'm going to do 200 Stadium Drive, Williamsburg, Virginia. Okay, and I'm going to turn on all the layers to see which programs they're eligible. So it looks like they are eligible for business programs, CF, guaranteed loans, electric. They're just not eligible for web. And like I said, water and environmental program has the lowest population threshold of 10,000. And that's why it's in orange. So if I turn off water and environmental program, it will show up as eligible for the rest of the program. Okay. So I'm going to go back to the presentation. Okay. Now for statutory requirements, I briefly talked about funding allocation formula. More specifically for single-family housing program, community facility program, water and environmental programs, they are administered, certain programs are administered through the state offices, and that funding allocation formula are decided by the census data. Mostly the decennial data and the ACS data. So for example, for single-family housing program, we use rural population for each state. We also use the housing burden data from the ACS, and then poverty and unemployment data from the ACS for non-metropolitan areas. We use, of course, decennial census data, sex by race and by Hispanic or Latino origin, age breakdown tables. We also use the rural population at the county level, and we roll them up to state in the US total. Like I said, we use income, poverty, and housing burden data from the ACS. So we actually use census data almost every day. These are showcases of internal geomapping, geospatial tools that houses some census data. For example, we have our targeting outreach mapping tool to map the communities of greatest need. So we layer the persistent poverty counties. We also layer potential opportunity zones. And on the map, we would have the previous obligations that were awarded for that geography. We also build new initiatives, and we usually accompany the new initiatives with the mapping tools. So the program officers can easily identify the communities for capacity building. Of course, we use census data, population, socioeconomic data. We also use ACS data a lot. So census data are critical in implementing the administrative priorities. We also have internal strategic investment mapping tool, so we can quickly identify underserved communities with high program demand. And we use socioeconomic and demographic data and layer over our previous investments, so we can easily identify which area needs more attention and outreach. Most recent project that we've been working on was the opportunity zones. So opportunity zone 2.0 identify census tracts that needs more attention by median family income and the poverty rate. So we use ACS data to determine which rural census tracts could be eligible to be selected as Opportunity Zone 2.0. And we provided this mapping tool internally to our state office directors and state office so that they can recommend which rural census tracts should be included in the opportunity zones for each state. So like I said, OZ eligibility depends on the census tract median family income and poverty rates. And we also use rural classification using the census rural urban designation plus our rural business program rural definition of population threshold of 50,000. And then we overlay some socioeconomic data like persistent poverty data and other socioeconomic data with OZ boundaries to highlight where investment could have the greatest impact. So because OZ maps are updated every 10 years, census data provides the baseline for future OZ cycles. For example, 2.0 in 2026 and beyond. So we're still waiting for the announcement of OZ census tracts that are selected. So why do we use census data? Because census is the only reliable sources and only agency that has data down to smallest geographies. In rural areas, of course, they're rural, so we don't get to have some data like metropolitan unemployment rate. So from the labor statistics, Bureau of Labor Statistics. So we have to rely on Census Bureau to provide the most reliable publicly available data for rural areas, and the applicants are directed to use census data when they submit their application. Actually, we like more granular level data from the Census Bureau for more successful and better targeted implementation of policy initiatives at the rural development. And I'm sure the public will benefit with the data that is specifically targeted, as such data will empower them to promote their needs more rigorously. Let's connect. If you have any questions or requests, please email data analytics team folder at rd.innovation.data@usda.gov. And we also have external website introducing the Innovation Center at USDA, usda.gov/rd innovation. So please contact us for any information.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We have a couple of great, that was really great. We have a couple of questions in the chat if you have a couple minutes.
Yes.
One, I believe, was specific to the tool you were showing. Are the maps and images updated as you change the demographics, or are these set images that show up?
You mean the external eligibility?
Yeah. Yeah.
They will change. It's a interactive live mapping tool. It's not a set images. So it will zoom in and zoom out as you type in your address or your city. Yeah, it's an interactive mapping tool.
Great. Hold on. Sorry, okay. The USDA produces several rural definitions from what this person understands. For HP, RUCC, RUCA, which definitions are used for rural development eligibility?
For eligibility, each program has different threshold of population. So rural business program has the highest threshold of 50,000 population. So if your project or your business is inside a city or town or village that has more than 50,000 population, it's more likely that you're not going to be eligible. Community facility programs have threshold of 20,000. Water and environmental program has 10,000. But even if your population is around 10,000 for water and environmental program, for example, we actually subtract the military and prison population. So you really want to check with the USDA representative to see if you're eligible. Now, for single-family housing and multifamily housing program, I didn't mention the eligibility because it's more complicated. We have a grandfather rule, which means that if you are eligible 10 or 20 or 30 years ago, you might be still eligible since you were eligible in the previous years. So if you're doing a single-family housing loan for 30 years, then even if where you live increase in population because you were eligible 10 years before, you might be still eligible. So you really need to check with your representative. Electric and telecom programs, a little trickier. So I'm not going to say something that's incorrect. So I'm not going to say anything, but they are mostly 35,000 or less.
Okay, wonderful. Let's see if there's other questions. Okay, there's one about Minneapolis. It appears there are opportunity zones 2.0 in Minneapolis. Isn't this an urban area, question mark?
So Opportunity Zone 2.0 is decided by the Commerce Department and it hasn't been published yet. So we have developed this tool to recommend which census tracts to be included in rural areas. So Opportunity Zone 2.0 could also include the urban areas. We're just promoting ourselves, rural development mission area is promoting ourselves to have the Commerce Department in the state to include more rural census tracts.
I think we'll have time for a couple more if you have a second. One person asked about the relationship, but I don't know if you know this, it being in USDA, that HUD uses, Housing and Urban Development. Does HUD provide guidance or input in the Opportunity Zone program?
I do not know. I can only tell you that we certainly use HUD data. The one that I used was actually the housing cost or housing burden data from the HUD when we do the civil rights compliance data call. But I do not know if HUD is doing what we doing something similar to what we're doing. I don't know. Sorry.
Oh, interesting. We might have to include them in another session if they're interested.
Definitely.
Yeah. One last question I have here. Is there involvement in rural urban commute areas? Is that a part of your program, and how are those created?
No, we're not involved in the urban and rural commute. It's solely from Census Bureau. We use the data from Census
Yep.
Bureau.
Just clarifying. Great. I really appreciate you joining us. Once again, thank you so much for coming on.
You're welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
All right. That was great. Once again, if people have questions, go ahead and use that Q&A functionality. We got through our first couple a little bit quicker than our schedule. We have starting pretty soon talking about Census Bureau geographic products with Kevin Hawley and Suzanne McCardle.